Good evening. Welcome everyone to the third webinar of the 16 Days of Activism Against Gender-Based Violence webinar series hosted by the International Youth Alliance for Peace under the theme of Empowering Voices, Ending Violence Against Women. So today's webinar will focus on the role of men in ending violence against women. So it is our honor to introduce Ms. Samita Sugathamala to take us through today's session. Ms. Samita is the Program Director at the Foundation for Innovative Social Development and a well-experienced trainer, advocate, and consultant on sexual and gender-based violence and gender justice. With over 18 years of experience, she has worked extensively on community-based approaches to prevent sexual and gender-based violence, empower women, engage youth, support child development, prevent substance abuse, and promoting gender justice through work with men and boys in Sri Lanka and South Asia. Ms. Samita contributed to Sri Lanka's National Action Plan on sexual and gender-based violence and serves on the steering committee for the 2024, 2014 and 2028 plan. She is also a co-member of the implementation team for the National Action Plan on Women, Peace and Security. In 2023, she was appointed global co-chair of the Men Engage Alliance. So it is truly a pleasure to have Ms. Samita Sugathimala to conduct our today's session. So before we begin, I would like to inform you all that the chat will remain closed during the presentation of our speaker today. So once the presentation is concluded, the chat will open for an open discussion where you can ask any questions or clarifications. I'm pleased to now hand over the floor to Ms. Samita, who will lead us in today's session. Over to you, Ms. Samita, to begin your session today.
Thank you, Inoka. Let me share my presentation. Right. So I think as far as I know, you have been having this series of sessions to commemorate the 16 days of activism against gender-based violence, which started on 25th of November. And at this point, I think we are going to discuss how and why engaging men as allies in fighting against gender-based violence is important. And in doing so, what are the things that we need to understand, analyze, and maybe sometimes, rethink in terms of making sure that we are doing it in the proper way. So let me take you through a few important points where you will also, just hold on, sorry. Right. So where you will have a kind of a broad understanding of engaging men and boys and how it kind of being done over the world. So let me okay. So just before going into talk about engaging men and boys, let me just give a small briefing. I know that the series have been talking about gender-based violence, maybe in a more descriptive manner over the days, and we'll also discuss later. But for the benefit of my presentation, let me just give a briefing of what gender-based violence means. As we all know, gender-based violence refer to the harmful acts directed at individuals based on their gender. And it stems from unequal power dynamics and deeply rooted social norms, often reinforcing discrimination and control over women and marginalized groups. So, in terms of marginalized groups, these groups could be any belonging to any gender identity or people coming from different societies or differently able people as well. So,
Sorry to trouble you,
yes.
Miss Samita. We can't see your screen.
Really?
Yes.
Okay, I'm so sorry. It shows me that it is being shared. Let me stop share and share it again then. Do you see it now?
No.
I get the message that your shared screen can only be seen by host and co-host. And it says I'm share screening. What else can I do?
Nelum, can you see the screen, Nelum?
Because for me it says that I'm sharing the screen. Shall I try one more time?
Yes, please.
Is it the same? Can you see it now?
I think only a host and co-host can see the screen. So that's okay, Ms. Samita. We can go ahead. Once the access is given, everyone will be able to see the screen. No issue.
All right.
Yes, now we can see. Yes.
All right. Yeah, now it says all participants. Right. So just let me, okay. Right. So I was saying that I'll start with a just brief introduction to what gender-based violence means before going into discussing engaging men and boys. So for our understanding, GBV refers to the harmful acts directed at individuals based on their gender, and it stems from unequal power dynamics, which are actually deep-rooted in our social system, in our social norms, which we have actually learned through our socialization processes. So we all know that as per the statistics, and this might vary at the current stage because we don't have much data related to gender-based violence coming from in the current days. But we know that one in three women worldwide has experienced physical or sexual violence in her lifetime. So that's a huge number of people. And of course, including marginalized groups like LGBTQ individuals, people with disabilities, and especially women who are in the conflict zones can be at high risk to gender-based violence other than any woman or a girl that we are talking about in our society. So ending gender-based violence is not just a moral imperative, but a critical step toward achieving gender equality, human rights, and sustainable development. And that is why over the last maybe 30 years, since now it's being 30 years since the Beijing platform in 1995, where we initially started talking about engaging men and boys as part of gender and development approach that had been discussed. And very recently, I think it was just last week that the 30 years of Beijing had been commemorated. And we have been having the kind of, analysis of what impact it had been made to women and girls in terms of their development and their safety. And that is why it is really important that we also talk about engaging men and boys at this very juncture. And really in terms of commemorating the 16 days of activism as well. Engaging men and boys as allies is really essential to transform the kind of harmful social norms that we have been talking about earlier, and in order to reduce violence, which will definitely benefit individuals and all societies alike. And when it comes to engaging men and boys, it is actually the first thing that we need to understand is that it is not the end goal. Because sometimes we have noticed that people think that engaging men and boys is a project that that you need to work towards engaging them. So that becomes the goal. But when we say engaging men and boys, it definitely should not be the goal in itself, but it's a way to achieve gender justice. So it's always we have to ask the question why we need to engage men and boys and how we need to engage men and boys. Therefore, within the process that we really need to be very clear and often revisit our actual goal, which being the gender justice, and of course, on the way, prevention of gender-based violence and creating safer societies for women as well. So when it comes to why engaging men and boys, I think in very simple terms, it has an ethical or moral obligation for men and boys to speak out. Because in a society where men and boys have more power and privilege, that speaking out also becomes something that they can definitely do in the position that they are given in the society, which of course not only benefit women, but also will benefit men and boys themselves, and ultimately will lead to gender equality that we are all looking for. So working with men and boys stems from and must honor the pioneering work and ongoing leadership of feminist and women's rights leaders and activists. Also, SOGISEC leaders, which is like people who are working towards the rights of LGBTQ people, and the organizations and networks. So it is not that something men had invented, like men came together and started, but it is actually women over the thousands of years, maybe hundreds of years, that women have been in this fight towards ending gender-based violence, achieving gender equality for everyone, not only for women and girls, but for everyone. So that is why we need to see that when we say engaging men and boys now, the work had already started. And now men are coming into supporting the work that women had already started. So this work definitely builds on the precious heritage of feminist vision and analysis, including by facing the elimination of inequalities in privilege and power that we mentioned earlier, that results from patriarchy. So how does patriarchy work, and what is the power structure that we are talking about? So in any society, this is the kind of scenario that we see when it comes to gender, because it's always comparatively based on power structure, who has more power than the other group of people. So in a very patriarchal society, we all know that comparatively the power structures give more power and privileges to men and boys. So this can be allow greater access to male persons in terms of education, giving access to information, and also kind of allow kind of influence the process of socialization in reinforced by all institutions, including family, religion, school, and also economy, and sometimes the state structures as well. When it comes to the social norms that we talked about earlier, in a patriarchal society, we will go into discussing what patriarchy means. In a patriarchal society, it is also, the power structures are also embedded in the social norms, how we look at things, how we do things, like what women should be doing, what men should be doing, and what justifies violence against women. There are so many social norms related to these things, which kind of justifies violence based on the power that the perpetrators might have, and definitely the powerlessness of the people who are undergoing violence. And also sometimes, like there is not only the norms, but there is also patriarchal ideology that we, not only as men and boys, but also sometimes, or mostly by women also, kind of, like go into that kind of ideology, like that we need to treat men like this, and we need to make sure that men take the decisions in the family, and we will have to be controlled by men, and we will have to be protected by men. So there's this patriarchal ideology that allows a natural superiority towards men, and give them more power and privilege. So that definitely leads to gender-based violence, depending on who has more power and privilege. So, and definitely allow male control of women's bodies, mobility, and labor. Now, for 16 days, you all know that we are talking about creating safe spaces, safe public spaces. And we, when it comes to public spaces, it's always like, something that limit women's mobility in our society, which is a kind of violence against women. Because, like if they go into a public space, we will always say that they were in a place that is not relevant to them. And that is how we want to make sure that women stay in a relevant place, not going into public spaces, and not allowing them to give full access to their mobility. So that is how it's been controlled. And unless we talk about these social norms, unless we change the power structures in the society, that we will not be able to change these ideologies, because ideologies are taken forward in society both by men and women, depending on how they want to be kind of governed. So I think that's a kind of a bit of understanding how these power structures work in our society, and giving men more power and privilege, which justifies gender-based violence against women and maybe other gender identities, so that we say women should not complain about it. Moving forward, as I said, just let me go into a bit of a small briefing of what patriarchy means. So patriarchy refers to a system of social organizing. It's how our society has been organized, which is fundamentally organized around the idea that men are superior to women. Within this system, even those who may not approximate to the male ideal, such as, sometimes homosexual men, because they also have the male identity, they still stand to benefit from the privileges attached to being a man. But in a different context, they might be the kind of, vulnerable party coming from a different gender identities. But still, like that is how patriarchy works. Like if you have a male identity, then you automatically, naturally get that kind of privilege attached to being a man. So patriarchy means makes men superior, whereas masculinity is the process of producing superior men. So that is the difference between patriarchy and masculinity, because masculinity is, we always talk about masculinity in a very plural manner. Masculinity is because that there is no one way of being a man. There are many ways of being a man. We have understood that there are men who are harmful, there are men who kind of very compassionate, men who are very caring, men who are very loving, and there are men who are very toxic, who very violent. So there are different kind of masculinities. So we can never talk about masculinity, which is being ways of being a man, in a singular way. So it's always discussed in a plural manner. So it refers to the socially produced but embodied ways of being a man or male. Its manifestations might include their manner of speech, their behavior, their gestures, social interactions, a division of task, which is like what is proper for men and what is proper for women, and an overall narrative that position it has superior and to its perceived and antithesis of, again, comparatively to the femininity. So this understanding is very important moving forward, when we want to see how we need to kind of position the work with men and boys, rather than just saying that that we need to bring in men to our programs. Just by having men equal number of men in our programs will not do any difference at all to our the objectives that we are looking for, and definitely will not support our work on prevention of gender-based violence. So what does meaningful engagement means? If you are to meaningfully engage men and boys, it should be aimed at changing the condition of women and girls. So unless it doesn't change the situation for women and girls, you cannot say that we have meaningfully engaged men. And interventions needs to be transforming the patriarchal norms that we talked earlier. Unless these changes are not happening, then we are not meaningfully engaging men and boys. So it has to address acts of violence and the masculinities attached to these acts, rather than just taking men as sole perpetrators. Because this whole process of engaging men and boys is not like how do you work against the perpetrators, and is it like you treat all men as perpetrators and then make sure that that you talk to men about how to not be a perpetrator. It is not something like that. It is like that you talk about these different ways of being a man and transform your ways, transform the way you think, transform the way you behave into a different ways of being men, which is more caring and which is more compassionate and loving. So going beyond, it has to go beyond individual behavior, because sometimes, we say that, okay, like we changed one man, I was able to change my husband. So those are really important efforts, individual behavior changes are really important. But unless the systemic change, the power structures, the institutional structures doesn't change, the way the institutional cultures which support patriarchy, like who take the decision, who should be given priority, who get the promotion. So all these needs to change. And it will not automatically change, but people need to take meaningful efforts. So it has to go beyond individual changes, and definitely has to take intersectional approach, which has to include men from different intersections. We'll also go into that little later. So in terms of how to engage men and boys, we have tried many things. And I think there are many ways that had been very successful. But, in terms of engaging men and boys, definitely men need safe spaces. Because once, people label them as the kind of, people who should be the breadwinners, who should be, you should not be crying, you should be very tough and rough. It becomes so difficult and challenging for men to come and discuss about their vulnerabilities, or come and discuss how they want to care for the world, how they want to share things. It will be really difficult when we label them in that kind of masculine patriarchal manner. So that is why men really also needs to have these safe spaces that they will not be judged, to discuss and reflect on their power and privilege. It's really effective when men are engaged at very young ages, from childhood, from adolescence, because then you know that it's really easy for you to reflect and change your learnings. We are not saying that we should not work with adult men, but it is more effective when you start young. Men need to be engaged at institutional settings, in institutional levels, people who are in positions of power, and also bring in the intersectional approach, because men are not homogeneous. There are different kinds of men who are coming from different social classes, different religions, different caste. So the institutional structures that are supporting these different intersections are kind of different. So we need to understand those differences and work in a very conscious way, understanding, making sure that the institutional settings are actually changing. The conversations with men actually need to range from self-care, because we know that when you like you have those labels as like tough and rough men, they are not supposed to take care of themselves. So they need to be taken cared by somebody, like that is where the women become the homemakers. So men taking very conscious effort to caring of themselves and reflecting on their power and privilege, that it should not limit to just conversations to make men more comfortable. And that is really important. I'm saying that again, these efforts with men and boys, making sure that, that they have self-care, they are reflecting on their power and privilege, we are creating safe spaces. It should not limit to conversations with make men comfortable, because these conversations are really not comfortable. They are really challenging and very critical. So that is why we need to address those critical issues to change the social systems that we are looking at. So just give me 1 minute. So we always talk about gender transformative approach when we are doing any interventions towards gender equality. We are saying that it's really difficult to change situations, change things, unless our efforts are not transformative. So it's the same when it comes to engaging men and boys or challenging patriarchal masculinities. It has to be transformative, which means that it needs to go beyond individual behavior change to challenge and shift the social norms, the social structures, and systems that perpetuate gender inequalities. Because like when we talk about masculinities, the word that we refer to now compared to the word earlier used, maybe some of you might already have heard about toxic masculinities. We are not using that term anymore, because toxic is just one way of being a man. So we are using the word patriarchal instead, because patriarchal just give that kind of wider picture of how social systems work and how the society is being divided in terms of power. So that is why we are using patriarchal masculinities. So gender transformative approach should address these root causes, especially in terms of gender-based violence, in terms of patriarchal beliefs and practices which justifies violence, and institutional discriminations in laws, policies, and cultural traditions. We know that there are laws sometimes to prevent gender-based violence, even domestic violence, but the institutional settings, like when you go to the police, it's a patriarchal system, and it doesn't support the law. It doesn't like it kind of analyzes the law in a very patriarchal manner, and it doesn't support the way that it should support women and girls who are going through violence. So unless these institutional settings and the people who are working in these settings do not change their social norms, the attitudes, that practices, the things will not change, and it will be really difficult to change or prevent gender-based violence. And of course, there are unequal power dynamics within our households, our communities, within our own relationships, within spouses, within children and parents, within adults. So there are these different relationships which depend on these power dynamics. So we also need to look at how social norms, these deep-rooted social norms, are defined in these kind of relationships, and create ways, create spaces for men to come and discuss about it and change accordingly their relationships, their environments, so that it will definitely lead to prevention of gender-based violence, because the goal is to create a lasting change, to promote gender equality, to prevent violence, to create a safer society, rather than just engaging men and boys, as number of people who are joining into our programs. Okay. So this process also need a lot of unlearning and requires a lot of reflection of our own power and privileges, because sometimes when we do have privileges, we don't understand the vulnerabilities of other people, and people who have privileges are always afraid to give them away, thinking that then it will be really not beneficial to them, and it will limit their own power and the places in the society. So that is why we need to create spaces, create conversations, that people talk about these privileges, and see how much interesting the world becomes if you are allowed to share these privileges, if you are allowed to share the power. So that those conversations we need to create, and that is how engaging men and boys become really kind of realistic. And we also need to reflect on our roles within the family, in community, as fathers, as brothers, friends, work colleagues, community leaders, power holders, or even decision makers. In that kind of social norm setting, where patriarchal mindset is being defined within these roles, and can even reflect. These reflections can happen through class, caste, religion, because sometimes we know that our religions talk about caring and sharing and love. But when it comes to institutionalization of these religions, it becomes more patriarchal, and it defines different people in different ways. And it gives care to different people in different ways, which sometimes is not in the original teachings. So that is why these reflections are really needed. And sometimes there are customary laws, regulations that we need to dig in and see how patriarchal they are, and how much we need to reflect on those things. And sometimes there are, not always things are related to power and privilege, but there are always vulnerabilities and powerlessness, even within men and boys, that needs to be reflected, need to be discussed, and need to be accepted, and also needs to find ways of coming out of them. We know that there are many men who undergo a lot of issues, lot of pressure, do not even seek health support. They do not seek counseling, and sometimes they kind of think that because alcohol will also sometimes help you to get rid of these problems, because alcohol sometimes is also related to masculinity, and that is how the alcohol companies use the product. So those are all powerlessness, and definitely there is a cost on patriarchy, on men. And we really need to look at all those things and allow men to bring them together and allow them to reflect on those things. And inner work is that process of reflection. that you look at your own self. The transformative work with men and boys is not possible unless you do your inner work. Inner work is that self-reflection. So once you create the space, we have to take men through that process where they are able to take that inner work. Like think about their own behaviors and their own relationships, and where they really want to change and where they really want to support, where they want to be as an ally, support others. So this, sometimes you might have seen that wars that we have won turned into the same old shit with new regimes in command, since we have not done our inner work. We have not understood the root causes. We have not challenged the root causes, but we have just stopped the war. And it might come again and again unless we do not do that inner work. So this can happen anywhere. Now see, even our organizations, our own organizations, we as CSO organizations, feminist organizations, we are also sometimes do not reflect on our own power and privilege. We sometimes use the position of power to kind of, control other people while talking about gender equality. Sorry. And the same inequality we fight, the power and privilege we question, has become part of our own work. So that is the inner work that we need to do. How accountable are we as organizations? And the important word that I want to highlight here is that our personal needs to become political. Because sometimes when at personal level we talk about equality and many other things, but politically we don't think about it in the same manner. Or like in politically we just talk about those things, but personally in our own behavior it doesn't match. So our personal has to become political. What we believe, we have to act. So this is something that we need to discuss with men. So the other thing that we talk about when it comes to engaging men and boys is how do we engage them to become accountable allies, so that they also take the same leadership, they also take the same partnership as women did, as women are doing, in terms of change the situation for women and girls and for themselves in order to prevent gender-based violence or any other types of violence that happens. So accountable allyship involves being consistent, self-aware, and responsible in supporting gender equality while ensuring one's own action align with the goals and priorities of women and marginalized groups. Because we have seen that sometimes men say that, no, we believe in gender equality, we want to support, but their behaviors doesn't say that. When they go back to being men, when they go back to their own peer groups, they behave in a different way. And sometimes they do not support women's leadership and also take the space that women had been owning throughout the history. So we really need to be mindful of these things. And of course, when it comes to accountability, there are a few things that we need to keep in mind. Accountable male ally will always listen and amplify the voices of women. They will recognize, address personal biases and privileges. They will always collaborate with women's movements without trying to dominate the spaces. because even within Men Engage Alliance, which is I'm part of, we have seen that some men who come into the position of power, into the leadership, try to dominate women who are also in the same similar kind of leadership. So those things really need to be addressed if you are an accountable ally, and that is why the global networks like Men Engage Alliance has an accountability framework that govern the membership. So unless you are signing into the accountable framework, you cannot be a member of Men Engage Alliance, for example. So being open to constructive criticism, because sometimes we think that we do everything right, we don't want to hear criticism, and being willing to make changes when feedback was given. towards your problematic behavior. Because sometimes we have done that, we have mentioned the problematic behavior that some men and boys are bringing in, and they are not ready to take it. So then that doesn't mean that we are meaningfully engaging them. So if as a male, if you want to be an accountable ally, you will have to kind of listen, being open to that constructive criticism and willing to change those things, and also create spaces where women and marginalized groups can provide honest feedback about the allyship and the behavior of the ally and actions that they take. So that is what when it comes to accountable allyship, what it means. And something that I really want to highlight is when it comes to the whole conversation on challenging or transforming patriarchal masculinities, I think I have discussed this a little bit earlier as well. Importance of understanding intersectional feminist approach. Because, like this intersectionality, we are recognizing the experiences of gender, power, privilege, which is shaped by, factors like race, caste, class, ethnicity, sexual orientation, religion, or even ability, has to be, understood when we are engaging men and boys as well, because men are also not homogeneous group. They are also coming from these different groups. So it is the intersectionality was initially discussed and being brought into the conversation by feminist organization, and we are taking that same legacy when it comes to engaging men and boys as well, having that kind of feminist lens, centering the voices and experiences of the most marginalized. For example, if you are working with young men in urban slums, you can't just talk about power and privilege, like engaging them into dismantle patriarchy, unless you talk about the situation that they are in terms of poverty and in terms of other male-to-male violence, other situations coming from maybe caste systems. So unless you talk about them, you can't just engage them in a meaningful way, because these are very much interrelated. And I think this is the last important point that I'm going to mention. The work with men and boys is also really challenging sometimes, because unless we as people who engage men and boys do not address the resistance that comes from certain men and boys, to the work that we do in terms of gender equality, prevention, violence, whatever that, that in the justice, social justice system, we are not kind of, fully supporting, because there's always this backlash coming from certain type of people or organizations or networks. And this resistance or backlash is sometimes very severe, and it's really difficult to understand or to identify. You never know who is bringing the resistance. Because sometimes, just to give you a few examples, in the global level, there are different anti-rights groups, and there are also men's rights groups. And, sometimes we celebrate International Men's Day, which is also coming from the men's rights group without knowing where it is coming from. And that is why Men Engage Alliance is not supporting that, and instead talk about different ways of engaging men and boys. So we really need to understand who are the anti-rights groups and where the resistance is coming, because they also name themselves as people who want to work on prevention of domestic violence, groups who really want to talk about human rights, but they only talk about male human rights, and do not have any processes towards dismantling patriarchy or having that kind of reflective process that we talk about. They never want to talk about power and privilege, because they are really fear of losing power and privilege. And definitely there are misunderstandings of gender equality as a threat to men's roles. Like we have been hearing this all the time, no? So gender equality comes as a threat to men. And are you going to, change men into women? So these are the, different conversations that is coming in from the resistance group. And sometimes, they have so much internalized the patriarchal norms, and that they really do not want to make the change. They just reject change. So resistance can often stem from deeply ingrained cultural beliefs. It might come in different forms, and anxieties, that people are really fearful about their own identities, which is so much related to masculinities. And in terms of strategies to address resistance, we really need to create those safe spaces for dialogue, so that men who are even feeling uncomfortable can come and talk about their own issues, which should encourage open and not judgmental discussions with men. And of course, we need to use so much of participatory methods when it comes to bringing men together, having peer discussions, having discussions with the fathers. Like there, that in the global world, there are different programs that support that kind of methodologies. It might be called men care, it can be positive fatherhood. So there are so many aspects, so many interventions that create that kind of safe spaces, so that men, as sometimes not as men, but as fathers, they feel comfortable and talk about their own vulnerabilities. And definitely we need to build community support, engage women's movements, community leaders, and other stakeholders to strengthen collective responses towards resistance. Because resistance cannot be handled in isolation. It has to be a collective effort. And in that collective effort, we definitely need men and boys to be on board and be accountable allies. So although it's a lot, and I might have a lot of other things to talk about, for the time factor, I will stop here and allow any questions, and most willing to answer if there's anything. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Samita, for your valuable insights on the role of men in ending violence against women. I think with your background, you did justice to the content, and it was really comprehensive. So I would like to ask few questions from you, actually. As the global co-chair of the Men Engage Alliance, will you be able to share the key objectives and work of the alliance?
Right. Men Engage Alliance actually started in 2004. It's been almost 20 years now. And it's a member-based network. Give me a minute. It's a social change network, and it kind of harness the collective energies of its members, because it's a member-based one. We in South Asia, we have Men Engage Alliance South Asia, and likewise there are other 6 regions where regional alliances are being established, because it's a very much of a bottom-up approach, where members at the ground level do the real work. Like for example, if you take me, although I am the co-chair at the global level, I am so much embedded in the civil society activism in Sri Lanka, and as a member of Men Engage Alliance, doing the work that I just talked about in our own communities, and bring those evidences to the larger alliance, so that others can also learn from it and also kind of benefit from it. So that's how the alliance works. Definitely working towards ending patriarchal power, protecting human rights, and achieving gender justice for all. So we are a member-based network, and a space for members from the globe to come together in solidarity, because there are I think around 1,100 members at the moment across the 6 regions. And we actually do this work collectively to dismantle these structural barriers towards women's rights and gender equality. So as a global network, we bring together people and organizations with this shared vision of a world which gender justice and human rights are recognized, promoted, protected, where all people are equally treated and free from discrimination and oppression. So just to go through quickly the mission of Men Engage Alliance, it is to transform those unequal power relations that we talked about and dismantle patriarchy by transforming patriarchal masculinities and rigid, harmful norms around being a man. I mean, any society, even, like, say, you within your organization, within the school that you are part of, within the university that you are part of, there can be many definitions of being a man. Even within a particular group, there can be definitions of being a man. So that is why we say that it is like it's a plural thing, that there are so many ways of being a man, and you really need to understand how it is being developed and what are the social norms around it. And unless you work towards dismantling those social norms, then it is really difficult to change anything. So that is part of the mission of Men Engage Alliance. And also we work with men and boys on gender justice through intersectional feminist approaches, which I talked about earlier, and build inclusive collaborations from local to regional to the global levels. These collaborations actually goes beyond sometimes the membership, and also like develop joint actions in partnership with and accountability to the women's rights, gender, and other social justice movement. So we also work across these social justice movements, and which we call network building, movement building. Unless we build the movement with other social justice movement, that collective action and that shared vision cannot be achieved. So that is what Men Engage Alliance is all about. So if anyone is interested to join Men Engage Alliance Sri Lanka, at the moment, Shanti Margam is the national secretariat, and maybe you can just send an email to them. It's Men Engage Alliance Sri Lanka @gmail.com, saying your interest and asking, requesting an application. So just to mention that as well. So if you are interested and you really want to be part of the work to dismantle patriarchy. So yeah.
Yes, thank you, Ms. Samita. Before moving into the questions from our audience, I would like to ask one final question from you. Will you be able to, tell us some of the main challenges you have encountered in promoting gender justice and addressing masculinities?
Well, we actually have a lot of interventions that we do in our communities, working with men and boys. I can just let me take one or two examples. When it comes to engaging young boys, because I told you earlier that that we need to engage them at a very young age. So we are working very closely with young people, and we have developed a reflective journal. If anybody is interested, I can put the link to that journal, because it's a journal that anybody can work individually and reflect on their own learnings, on their own power and privilege, and different identities that they have gone through within their own lifetime. So it's a reflective journal that we have developed for young boys, adolescents from 14 to 19 years of age. And young boys are quite interested to have this kind of be part of this kind of journaling program, and they really value the journal, but they have faced a lot of challenges The challenges actually comes within the interventions. They have faced a lot of challenges from their some of their peer groups, and sometimes even from their parents as well, because they are questioning, like journaling is not a boy thing, like journaling is a girl thing, and why do you want to have a journal being a boy? But like many boys who have taken the journey of reflective journaling had expressed how it had helped them, find their own true identities. For example, we had one boy who had been really struggling, who had been really challenged at his school because of his gender identity. So his ways of behavior, everything was being criticized, and he had been even bullied. So he actually embraced the reflective journaling program, and now he thinks that I am really proud about myself, and I know that this is who I want to be, and I will stand for that. I will stand for that, and I will kind of help others who have the same kind of identity problems. So when some people really want to go through this, and there are definitely within the environment, you get the resistance. So resistance is very much there, and you will never know how it is coming, and it can be your best friend as well, because that is how their learning had been. But definitely you have to work through the challenges and make sure that you create that kind of safe spaces that I talked about earlier, so that even those friends can become part of programs like this. And it's the same experience of men who are part of our Loving Father program, because we really want to bring them into a very having very qualitative time with their children, and children were the people who were requesting that from their fathers. So we had certain experiences where like fathers actually did not, even with the request of their children, did not want to change their ways, because they were too much influenced by their peer group, because they have been labeled and they have been criticized and they have been laughed about by their peer group, who are like more into alcohol and more into like different other behaviors, that they are not allowing fathers to be loving, like fathers who really wants to be caring, even spouses who really wants to be sharing. The people around them really do not want that kind of behavior change, because they fear of losing the power and privilege, not knowing that sharing power and privilege will support them in more meaningful way. So these are some of the challenges, very simply, that I can mention. But of course there are many higher level challenges when it comes to institutional and policy levels, when we do not have support from the people who make decisions in terms of implementing programs which will include men and boys, which will create the safe spaces that we really want to create in some of these institutional settings.
Okay, thank you so much, Ms. Samita, for your comprehensive explanation. I think a few of our participants also, had mentioned their concerns, and they said that this is very useful, and they even asked for the recording. So the recordings will be available at the IYAP official YouTube channel. So after the session, y'all can log into and get the details. So on behalf of the entire team of IYAP, I would like to thank Ms. Samita for your time and efforts today. We really appreciate it. So with that, we will be moving on to the questions from our participants today. So with that, we will be closing our live session, and we will be moving on to the questions and questions from the audience, where